So I think the biggest bang for the buck, or having really effective accomplishment for cybersecurity at any company would be really building out a culture of security, and which essentially means making sure everybody has the right tools and resources to implement their aspect of security.
Welcome to CyberOx Tales, the podcast where cybersecurity scenarios meet reality. In each episode, we'll sit together with the top cyber pros to dissect major security incidents, giving you actionable insights and practical advice to fuel your playbooks and success. Ready? Let's go.
Hello, hello. Hi, this is Nitzan Ziv from Cyber Oxtails. And with me today, I've got Rohit. Rohit, why don't you present yourself to our audience?
Hey guys, Rohit Pachuri here. So I'm the CISO and Senior Vice President for Cyber at a company called Yext. And I'm so glad and also excited to be here with you, Nixon. Looks like we do have something fantastic on the agenda. So looking forward to that.
Yes. So, first of all, tell me, you got to the CISO role. It is a big debate right now whether people actually want to be a CISO or get out of that position. But what made you want to be a CISO?
Okay, so I think first let me address people either trying to get into CISO role or outside. I think there it depends. I think don't take the CISO role up for the title. There's a lot more that goes into that, and hopefully we'll talk more about this also as we go through the discussion. But I think CISO as a title I think, is one of the most misunderstood titles of any C-suite role that's out there. So Chief Information Security Officer, I think it's good for you to understand before you jump into that, what exactly that entails, the responsibilities of that role, and more importantly, like, where you're coming from and how you can provide the impact to that role, and of course, to the company or organization that you're working for. So there's a lot that, kind of fits into that role. In some cases, it's, the people are not, able to properly communicate about the role, or in some cases, people are overly communicating about things which are not even a part of the role. So, there needs a delicate balance in how you understand that. So now that's taken care of, let's talk about me and why I came into this role. So maybe let me quickly give you all an understanding about where I come from. So I come from India, specifically South India, and I did my bachelor's in electronics and communications there. And one of my capstone courses was, I wouldn't say course, but a project was to work around the cybersecurity aspect of things, which essentially is how do you manipulate the programs. And if any of you remember the Windows XP, that's the platform that was given to work about on the project. And I found it very interesting on how you can manipulate and tamper with the programs. So that kind of led me to the branch of cybersecurity. And when I started investigating and kind of doing a discovery, I found like maybe a handful of universities that actually, provided this as a degree in the United States. And so I jumped on it, and I was very fortunate enough to, get enrolled in a university called DePaul University in Chicago, which actually gave out a proper degree in computer information security. So that's where my journey began when it comes to cyber. And then, I think with that, the degree also, just given the content and context that they provided, within the course, that helped me understand like how exactly do we navigate different places or different aspects within cybersecurity. And after that, I jumped to a company called Rackspace Technologies in San
Of
Antonio,
course.
Texas. Yeah, as a network security engineer, just given my core focus was on that, and I was very passionate about networks in general, so that kind of fit in effectively well. And then after that, I moved on, to different segments within security, into application security, security operations. There was a bit of compliance and field enablement also. I think the reason I was jumping here and there is really for me to explore the different dimensions of cybersecurity. And also, this was we were talking a little. We were talking about cyber in the yesteryear, which is not fully baked in. And I'm not going to say it's fully baked in even right now into everything that we do as a company. But I think even back then it was even in a worse shape. So for me, I couldn't really wrap my head around, okay, what are all the things that we need, within cybersecurity to make it successful? So I was, kind of getting myself exposed, I would say, to different
But
things.
you are also preparing yourself, saying, I want to
Yeah.
understand this domain and that domain. So you got a very, I would say, healthy coverage of the cybersecurity domain from the risk perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was definitely one of the goals, which was maybe mostly unconscious for me, because I was trying to just figure out like what are the technical elements. Because I come from a lot, technical background. I was just trying to figure out, from a technical standpoint, why does this matter? What can go worse in case, something, if there was an impact or, some sort of an aspect within the company that got affected. But unconsciously, to your point, I was also, which I didn't know at the time, but now when I look back, I do see there was, a lot of risk that went into that on how I was, recalibrating and also kind of, prioritizing things based on the risk itself.
So
Um,
you've seen a lot, but there's a big difference between being part of the team and saying, I'm going to lead the team, or being the person accountable for the risk. When did you know that you want to do this change?
yeah, good question. Oh my God. This was, I think, when I was working at ServiceNow. And this, ServiceNow happens to be one of that kind of the breeding grounds for me where I got access to multiple different things, just given the security team was small back then. And when I saw different aspects of security and how they're really built out, I figured I think what I felt back, during that time is maybe there's no single structure or an organized approach on how things have to be seen from a cyber angle, when you're thinking about it from a corporate standpoint. So I think that's where I felt it was very disjointed. I felt the things that were not really coming across to the people who are actually making the decisions. How do you communicate risk? How do you communicate threats? How do you talk about security investments, at a company level? So I figured those are the things that were not happening. So I figured like maybe that's, something I could do better, based on a few discussions I had with the executives back then. And so I think the triggering point for me was to really bring structure, and make it a little more unified in how we think about cyber. And yeah, and becoming a CISO or becoming a security leader specifically, I think that was definitely not. I haven't carved that out specifically, but I think the situations kind of led me there.
Amazing. So you get to a new organization as the person that is accountable for cyber risks. And now there are two different methods. One is I'm going to hire people, I'm going to buy tools, I'm going to manage everything, it will be fine. And there's also another approach that we talked about earlier. So you took a different approach. What was your approach?
Yeah. So you were mostly talking about when I start thinking about building a program, building a team, like what are the key aspects I would look at?
Yeah,
I think a few things. So, we spoke about this earlier. Like, what does Chief Information Security Officer really entail? Like, what does it comprise of? And it's different for different companies, and it's a special snowflake. Like, when you talk about other C-level positions, there's a certain structure built out because they're very seasonal, and it's been there for quite some time now. CISOs have been here, but when you compare that with the other C-level positions, the timeline is very short. And so we're still trying to figure out where exactly CISO fits in. So I think with that in mind, depending on, what is it that the company is trying to accomplish, from a risk standpoint, from a security standpoint, what is it that they're really looking forward to, having, of course, you in the position and, make that possible. I think, once you unwind that, once you figure out what the requirements of the company itself are, you'll have a better, I think you'll be able to really figure out what is it that you're trying to accomplish as a person yourself, and also as a CISO role dictates. So for me, it has always been. I think this is over the years. One thing I've figured out is the either the executives know this or not. The risk is always a cornerstone. Risk can have multiple branches, of course. What I'm talking about is cyber risk specifically. Um, and cyber risk itself is, I think that happens to be one of the strategic outcomes of any company that's looking to build a cyber program. If you have a well understood, well organized, well structured, cyber risk program, that really helps you out in multiple different directions. One is to talk effectively. I spoke about the communication before. Talk effectively, with your executives and in some cases board if you're reporting into them about why does this matter and why are the investments that we're making actually helping us out as a company. And two is also the obligations we have as a company. Every company has obligations, and cyber is going to be one of the most important parts of that. This could mean regulatory obligations, your compliance obligations, contractual obligations, and that directly fits into the risk also because there's a financial impact. As we talk more about risk, there's also going to be financial impact that feeds into that. So I think once you have the risk as a roadmap, there are multiple elements that kind of feed into that. So to your question, Nathan, sorry for going around, but your
No, no,
question,
it's okay. Go ahead. Sorry.
yeah. No, I was just going to say, I'll wrap this up. So I think once you have the cyber risk as the framework or the building blocks of, how you would think about building a program, I think that sets you up for success, not just for short term, but also, how you think about this long term and then work your way backwards.
Okay, so now that you know that you want to start on a more strategic level, so the next thing is you form the committee itself, the risk committee or the cyber risk committee. How do you do it? Which people are you calling into the game?
Yeah, so let's talk about the cyber risk committee, or maybe let's talk about the cyber risk program real quick. So there are key aspects to this program, and the cyber risk itself. Like, what is it? What are we calling it as risk? Risk is something where it could have significant impact to the company operations, or it could have some kind of a disruption to to how we run a company. And so essentially, the chief information risk officer or the team itself that's comprised within that role, what they're trying to do is help identify that, identify the risk that's to the company from a cyber angle, assess it, and of course, figure out a remediation plan. So with that in mind, there's, we could use frameworks, and framework is highly recommended, but not mandatory, of course. But that is, that's kind of like a guiding pathway to build out a more effective and a successful, risk program. So within the risk program, also, there's a risk committee. So there are three key components, right? So there is a risk committee, which is really made of people, essentially the stakeholders, and mostly the executive team. When we talk about the committee, this is where CISO mostly is responsible for chairing that committee and communicating about the risk and the treatment plans and whatnot. And then there's a second part, which is really the process element or the governance element, which is once you communicate, you need to figure out a way to perform the next steps or treat the risk as it's appropriate.
Yeah.
And then lastly, you'd also have some kind of a tech to help you kind of build out certain catalog of risk, which we also call this risk register. I think which we'll talk a little bit more about. But the risk committee is super important, just given that is the linchpin of everything else, because everything starts with a person, ends with a person, right? Without humans, there's no way we could even advance the risk. So I think that's
Not yet, not
and
yet.
especially
Give it a
yeah,
few more years, and who knows?
maybe I think how I would argue also the what who's seeing that, it's still going to be a human, right, in some form.
Yes.
So
Amazing. So just you mentioned here briefly, it's like you've got a committee, you've got a subcommittee, you've got risk register. So how do you connect those three? What's the triangle?
yeah, I think so these three components. So the risk committee is where I think you would begin, and also ultimately have the having the successful outcomes of the risk committee would actually help you out in making sure you have a well-rounded risk program. So the question is, how do you connect these three? So the guiding pathway, like I said before, it's not mandatory, but it's recommended, is to have a framework. The framework really helps out where exactly these different positions kind of sit. And it's better if you can start having an analysis plan, a risk analysis plan thereof. The plan itself would outline who and which roles should be present in the risk committee, because it has to be diverse enough. If not, then you're kind of missing out the whole point of having the risk committee. And when I say diverse enough, I'm talking about people from different verticals. And depending on the company, you could have your chief financial officer, chief technology officer, chief human resource or people officer sometimes. But the idea is to communicate about the cyber risk, from a perspective where it matters and affects the company, and which is why you need to have the company heads as part of that. And now you have that set up, right? So now the next step is to make sure that everything that's coming out of the risk committee, and depending on how you would hold the meetings, or what the cadence of the meetings are, the agenda, that's something we can talk more in depth. But once you have that, there has to be an outcome in terms of how you would actually push that forward. When you identify risk, when you talk about the risk, now you got to figure out how do you make sure that's remediated, or in some cases you're accepting it. It really depends on what's the outcome of the meeting itself, or the series of meetings. And so that's the process. Look, now you're taking that, putting that into a process, and there's a certain governance that has to be enabled within that. So there's right people who are actually helping out with the risk, and also we're tracking and monitoring as we go forward. And lastly, the risk register is also a part of this whole process, because that's where the cyber team really operates. The cyber team is responsible for identifying and assessing, as we spoke about, and the cyber risk register actually helps you out with different components of why there's a certain risk that's high, why a certain risk is low, and there are different factors that would enable that. But the ownership would be residing within the cyber department, but there's a lot of feed that would be coming from different departments, especially when we're talking about the financial and the other aspects of risk that would affect the company ultimately.
So if I get this right, what you're saying is the cyber risk committee represents the desired state, the subcommittee represents the current and execution abilities, and the risk registry is the difference between them. It's exactly the gap.
Uh, Sort of. So I think the risk register applies to, so think of risk register as, maybe a root of the cyber risk program. It applies to both the cyber risk, the committee, the cyber risk committee itself, because you're still using the outcomes of the risk register to communicate about the risk.
Mhm.
The subcommittee also, it matters because now you're taking away the business aspects of that, which you could still include, but the intent of the subcommittee is to actually do the ad execution, like you pointed out. So because of its execution focus, you would have more technical elements that are captured still within the risk register, but that's more applicable to the subcommittee instead.
Okay, so let's say, how often do you convene the cyber risk committee?
Right now we have, so cyber risk committee, we do the cadence of every quarter. So once every quarter we talk about the risks, and of course keep them informed about the things that that we're working upon. And for the subcommittee, which is really the tier one, we do that every month.
Okay, amazing. So now that we have everything in place and the organization are working, let's say if you identify risk, you talk about it in the risk committee, you understand it is a gap between the desired state and the current state. You get it back to the subcommittee and say, okay, guys, we kind of need to move on that direction. How does that look like in the subcommittee?
Yeah, I think this is where tech really helps out. When I say tech, I'm really talking about some kind of a tool, or where you could rather than having a spreadsheet, for example, like having a proper tool would be helpful. You can start with a spreadsheet, but I think what I'm talking about, the risk register, how do you catalog the risks out? It's not just about communicating, right? It's also about monitoring how the risk is being remediated. And in some cases we're talking about very comprehensive risk, let's say, which applies to the entire company. uh, and at that point, it's not just about a singular point of execution. It has multiple points of execution. So you need multiple people, multiple stakeholders that need to be brought into the process. And the idea is for the subcommittee are, the people who are ultimately responsible for gathering people, or gathering engineers, or gathering analysts to help out with the remediation part. So to your question about, hey, we meet every month. So we have 3 months worth of meetings with subcommittee before we get to the actual committee to provide the updates, right? Debrief them about what's happening. So within that, three meetings that we would have, every meeting would have a certain focal point. The first meeting, of course, right after the committee discussions with the subcommittee, the focus would be really figure out by the next meeting, really figure out the people that are needed for us to get the job done. If the treatment of the risk was identified to be remediated, if that is something we need to do, let's figure that out. The second meeting would be mostly focused on, have we done that? Have we identified the people who are responsible for it? And do we have a plan to push that forward? And the third meeting is to really review the plan, have the right people taken care of, and then use that, as an anchor to talk about the risk status with the committee itself as we meet with them the next time. The timelines depend. So, if there's a disconnect in terms of, what was committed to, and it's not, the promise is not really being kept, and every team works differently, and also there are certain things that may come up in the operational workflow that you have. But the idea is to make sure that we still have a plan in place, and we talk about the reasons why we're not able to push this forward and what that risk would be. So the risk of the risk itself, right? The
Exactly.
risk of not implementing something. So that's the aspect we usually take.
Amazing. So you've got the committees formed out, you've got a risk registry, and what's the connection between this process to the audit committee?
Good question. So we talked about two tiers right now, right? So we talked about the committee, we talked about the subcommittee. Subcommittee being the tier one, tier two being the committee itself, and then now we're adding additional layer, which is the tier three, which is the audit committee. If we think about the audit committee responsibilities itself, outside of everything financial, outside of everything SOX, the significant component would be cyber risk and cyber resilience. So for them to either take decisions or be informed about the cyber risk, we need to have a singular way to talk about that. Everybody has to talk about the same thing, right? Well, when I say same thing, in a same manner, so they're not confused and they know exactly what is it that we're actually doing in order to bring the risk levels down. We're not eliminating it; we're just reducing the risk.
So you're saying that for the audit committee, you need to normalize that a cyber risk would be identical to a currency exchange in one of the countries, saying this is a risk, but now we need to normalize everything to the same language.
Yes, but not every time that's possible. But I think one way to help, and this is something we did in the last year, to help them really understand how exactly cyber risk has to be understood, is create scorecards for different products. And given ours is a technology company, so the top line, the bottom line, everything depends on how we sell technology, right? So technology becomes that number one impact area in case something happens to that would affect our revenue directly. So what we ended up doing is to create scorecards for every product on our platform, and every product comes with an EBITDA, right? And if EBITDA is actually being impacted, which essentially means that there's a risk that we have to go about and treat it. And that's where the comparison happens. Okay, now we're fixing something where it would actually really have a good impact in terms of, within that product, for example. Also, one key point to make is another way for us to normalize or standardize these things is to connect this directly with the enterprise risk management program, which is not really handled by the CISO team itself. This is really coming from the internal audit. And so they have a certain way of capturing the SOX elements within that and talking to the board about. We could cyber risk, I think that's a great opportunity for cyber risk to also combine forces and have kind of the same viewpoint when you talk about the risk, so it's easily understood.
Amazing. Um, Anything that you would like to leave the audience with as one major observation or learning that you had over the past years?
I think that's a great question. I'm trying to think. I think we talk a lot about securing systems, securing information, specifically in the CISO realm or in the security realm. I think, for me, the biggest bang for the buck has been more how do we drive the culture of security within the company, not so much us fixing everything. So making it self-sufficient, making it self-service. So people, like empowering people with the right tools and right knowledge. And when I say people, I'm talking about the entire company, right? The idea, the goal is there. And it'll, sometimes it may not be completely possible. And sometimes it may be. But I think if you can bring that, that would truly, it's a force multiplier on how the security programs get accomplished and also successfully being accomplished rather than you or your team actually doing all the things that are required for security. Everybody has to be responsible for that. So I think embracing and bringing about the culture of security is important.
Amazing. Rohit, thank you very, very much for sharing your knowledge. It's always a pleasure to hearing for somebody like you, everything that they've went through, and what are their insights. So thank you very, very much.
Big shout out to, my partners in crime at Yext and the entire team of cybersecurity, and also, really the entire company, because just in order for us to accomplish what we're, trying to accomplish, like without the support of the entire company, it's very difficult. But specific shout out to my team, just, making things happen. And during the turbulent times that we're in right now, we're kind of slim across multiple, functions, but still, people have the right energy and passion to actually make things happen. So thank you guys. Thank you, Nathan. Hope it was helpful, and thank you for organizing this.
That's a wrap on another episode of CyberOps Tales. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your peers. Visit us at ox.security/podcast to access all episodes and exclusive content, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.